I still remember those days vividly, the laughter, the mocking voices, and the unbearable weight of embarrassment. My name is Jake and I grew up poor. When I say poor, I don't mean just scraping by. I mean living in a rundown neighborhood where the only thing more crumbling than our apartment was our self-esteem. As a kid, I was timid. My clothes were always a size too big, often hand-me-downs from a friend who barely made enough to share. Back then, the kids at school saw that as a golden opportunity to unleash their cruelty. "Look at Jake, can't even afford clothes that fit," they would sneer. I would just shrink into myself, hoping my face would disappear. In my head, I would scream, "And you know what she said to me? You're nothing without us." I'd never told anyone about the pain those words caused, but deep down it cut deeper than a knife. It felt like they lit a fire in my belly, a contraction of shame and hate that made my heart race in that toxic school atmosphere. Each day was a survival attempt. I would hide in the library, my sanctuary. The books piled like my fantasies, filled with hope, adventure, and dreams beyond my small town. But the mockery was not just confined to the schoolyard. I felt it at home too. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and on many nights I could hear her crying softly, wishing for a better life. It was heart-wrenching. As I navigated those turbulent teenage years, I learned resilience. My friends were few, but those who shared my struggles became my family. We leaned on each other, finding solace in our shared experiences. John, with his dirt bike, who would lend it to me when I felt the need to escape. Sarah, who always had a snack to share when hunger pangs reminded me of my own circumstances. They taught me that I was not alone. Yet, every time I was confronted by the harsh laughter of my peers, I felt that childhood hurt rise to the surface. Humiliation was a familiar feeling, one I wore like an old coat. I kept promising myself that someday, somehow, I would change my story. My time to shine would come. Then came the moment that shifted my perspective entirely. It was during a school talent show. I, an ambitious yet anxious teenager, decided to go out of my comfort zone and sing a self-written song, something raw and real. The crowd was buzzing, and for a moment I felt invincible. But when I stepped on stage, all I could see were the faces of my bullies ready to pounce. Once the music started, all the anxieties faded. But right in the middle of my performance, a voice roared from the back, "Stick to what you know, Jake. You can't even afford a real microphone." Laughter erupted, ringing like nails on a chalkboard, drowning out my carefully constructed melody. My heart sank, the microphone dropped, and I fled the stage in tears. That moment was the last straw. It was a light bulb moment. I knew I couldn't run away from the hurt anymore. I wanted to change everything. I needed to rise above. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "You can be better than them." From that day on, everything changed. I began looking for inspiration outside my immediate world. I started following the stories of individuals who had overcome great odds. I read about entrepreneurs who built empires out of nothing but sheer determination. I met Mr. Wallace, my history teacher, who took an interest in my passion for writing and helped me develop it. He told me stories of his background and how he managed to break free from poverty by pursuing education relentlessly. "Jake," he said one day, resting his hand on my shoulder, "you're just scratching the surface of what you can be. Don't let their laughter define your worth." Those words became the spark I needed. I made a vow to myself then: no more hiding, no more shrinking. I worked hard, picking up shifts at a local diner while taking extra classes at school. I traded my free time for long hours of work. My nights were filled with studying, fueled by instant noodles and the hope of a better future. Slowly, the tides began to turn. It was hard and exhausting, but with every passing day, I saw small victories. I managed to secure a few scholarships due to my hard work, and my grades started to reflect that. I found glimpses of my potential in the faces of my friends who had now become an unlikely support system. Every late-night study session, every ounce of hard work was beginning to pay off. But even with progress came moments of doubt, haunted by echoes of laughter that taunted me in my weakest moments. I kept pushing through the pain. The dream of one day standing triumphantly was a flame that continued to burn fiercely. I was ready to take back my story. Little did I know that my journey was just beginning. It was a grueling few years, but all the sacrifices began to take shape. I wasn't just getting by anymore, I was thriving. I pulled late nights to finish assignments, often fueled by instant coffee and the dreams that kept me awake. The laughter from my past became a distant echo, overshadowed by the sound of my newfound resilience. My friends encouraged me just as I had encouraged them. We would joke about finding a way out, but deep down, I felt that fate was giving me a shot at something greater. Then the day finally came, graduation day. I stood in my cap and gown, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders as I received my diploma. I graduated with honors and against all odds had secured a scholarship to college. That moment was not just an achievement, it was my redemption in the eyes of everyone who ever doubted me. I could hardly believe it. I looked in the mirror and noticed the change. My unkempt hair was now stylishly cut, and my attire, once baggy and worn, had transformed into something presentable. Confidence filled my stance, and for the first time I stood tall. The boy who once cowered under the weight of judgment had given way to a man who could carve out his own future. Walking through the halls during the graduation ceremony, I noticed a few of my former bullies. Their expressions were different, shocked, maybe a little envious, perhaps even respectful. I caught whispers among the crowd. "Is that Jake? No way!" It was surreal, almost like living in a movie where the underdog bested the bullies. But the journey didn't stop there. I headed off to college, determined to learn, grow, and ultimately succeed. I remembered Mr. Wallace's encouraging words and used them as a beacon for my ambitions. I dove into my studies, driven by that burning desire to change my narrative completely. I graduated that college with a great GPA, and opportunities came flooding in as companies sought fresh talent. Fast forward to 2 years later, I was back in my hometown, this time not as a shy boy with tattered shoes but as a successful entrepreneur. I had launched a startup that focused on revitalizing our neighborhood. I wanted to provide locals with jobs and skills they could take pride in. It was about giving back, but in my mind there was also a spice of sweet revenge. My first day back felt surreal. The streets I once felt ashamed of were now transformed in my eyes. I could sense the whispers following me, old faces intrigued by my abrupt shift in fortune. But I didn't care. I was here to show the world, especially those who once laughed, that we can all rise from our struggles. Then, as fate would have it, I stumbled upon them, my former bullies. There they were, unassuming, sitting at a local cafe, their faces turned towards me with caution and uncertainty. I decided to approach them. My heart raced. I was no longer the target of their ridicule, but still something felt unresolved. "Hey Jake," one of them spoke up, clearly nervous. "We heard about your business, congrats, that's really impressive." I simply nodded, "Thanks." I could see it in their eyes, the regret, the fleeting glances of recognition as they wrestled with the reality of who they had been. "You know, we were wrong about you, we'd like to apologize," one of them stuttered. The moment hung heavy in the air, thick with the tension of unspoken apologies, but I hesitated. Was this real? Was I ready to forgive them? The internal struggle raged. Part of me wanted to welcome the change in their voices and offer a second chance. But another part, a so-called darker part of me, found solace in their discomfort. They had once enjoyed my suffering. Suddenly, it made me feel powerful to see them seeking my approval. But I buried that part deep down. I stood up and announced, "You want to work with me? I'm starting a new project and could use help." Their eyes widened in surprise. It felt like an unexpected twist in a story, the climax of the arc I never anticipated. They agreed, eager yet uncertain, and soon I began hiring former classmates for my growing business. Little did they know they were about to learn a greater lesson than what they'd once taught me. I was excited and nervous in equal measure. When our first team meeting commenced, I laid out the plans for the project. Their faces reflected confusion, but I saw a glimmer of recognition. With each task I assigned, I noticed the bullying facade they had put on back in school begin to slip away. Weeks turned into months. The transformation was miraculous. The line between the past and present blurred, and as we worked alongside each other, something shifted. They began to understand the weight of their earlier choices. Little snide comments turned into genuine efforts of collaboration. They had no choice but to face the consequences of abusing power back then, but the stakes rose one fateful evening. During a crucial meeting, one of my former bullies, let's call him Derek, sabotaged a presentation I had been preparing for weeks. He laughed to himself, believing I wouldn't dare retaliate, but he was mistaken. Instead of anger, I remained calm. I told the team we would regroup and revise the strategy. It was a teaching moment not only for Derek but for the whole team. I decided to use this setback to demonstrate growth and resilience. "We all stumble," I said, looking most pointedly at Derek, "but it's what we learn from those stumbles that define us." The room fell silent. My message was clear. I wanted to foster a new culture, one of kindness and understanding, shaped by our collective struggles. Slowly but surely, Derek's laughter turned into uneasy silence as the reality of his actions washed over him. It was crushing for him to try and regain his footing in a workplace where he had once felt untouchable. As the weeks passed, I decided it was time to confront Derek directly. I needed to know why he had attempted to undermine me. I asked him to meet me after work at the cafe we once frequented. The tension between us was thick when he arrived. "Jake, why did you do it, Derek?" "Derek, I thought you wouldn't stand up for yourself. I didn't want you to have the upper hand." "Jake, you thought I was still that scared kid." There was a long pause, and in that silence I felt resolution building. It wasn't easy, but I understood that part of my journey was also recognizing human frailty. It wasn't about hurting those who had wronged me. I thought of Mr. Wallace, who had believed in me even when the world didn't. Derek muttered a reluctant apology, and perhaps for the first time I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "Jake, I see it now. I was a fool. Please forgive me," he said quietly. I paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Forgiveness was not just a gift, it was a strength that would set me free from chains of bitterness I no longer wished to carry. I decided to let go, to offer him a second chance. "Derek, let's move forward, no more sabotaging. We were classmates once, and there's no reason we can't be better co-workers now." As I walked away from that encounter, I not only felt lighter. I felt empowered. My story had evolved into something richer than a simple tale of revenge. I realized that growth sometimes comes from unexpected places. It was no longer about getting back at my bullies. It was about forging a future where empathy prevails over cruelty. The saga didn't close with anger, but with the satisfaction of transformation. A life once destined for despair was now a mosaic of resilience and understanding. We had all come full circle, showing that beneath our flaws lay the capacity to rise, learn, and, ultimately, forgive. As I settled into my role as a leader, I couldn't escape the strange mix of feelings that filled my head. I had pulled the former bullies from the pit of their own cruelty, and now they relied on me for their jobs. It was surreal to think I had turned the tables so completely. Yet that feeling of vengeance was complicated. Success didn't feel as sweet sitting in the same room as those who had once torn me down. But life has a unique way of bringing situations to a head. I watched as my former tormentors struggled to accept their positions within the new structure I had created. Dario, the loudest of my former peers, didn't let go of his habit of belittling others. Just because you wear a suit now, Jake, doesn't mean you're better than us, he sneered one afternoon during a meeting. I took a breath to steady myself. This isn't about being better or worse, it's about working together to build something great. Remember, Dario, laughter comes from ignorance, not strength, I replied softly but firmly. There was a moment of silence, and I could see others fidgeting, some absorbing the weight of my words while others leaned into denial, unable to let go of the echoes of their past behavior. I could sense the embarrassment hanging in the air, and for a brief time I wondered if they felt even a shadow of the guilt that had been my constant companion for so long. To my surprise, Kelly, another former bully, spoke up afterward. I want to apologize. I didn't realize how much my words could hurt. Gradually, others began to echo her sentiments. It was as if the layer of shame from our shared histories had begun to dissolve, allowing for a tiny spark of humility to glimmer through. Yet not everyone was ready to change. Dario remained defiant, trying to undermine me with snide comments at every turn. What began as a mentor-student dynamic started to feel precarious. I grappled with my own feelings. Was I here to take revenge or to foster growth? I realized I didn't want to be the boss whose power hinged on fear, but rather a leader who inspired respect. The line between justice and vengeance became blurred, and I had to keep reminding myself why I'd created this opportunity in the first place. The real test came unexpectedly when a major project I had initiated hit its first major roadblock. It had taken weeks of planning, and I felt a mix of pride and anxiety as I prepared to present to potential investors. I'd gathered everyone for a final review before the pitch, and I could feel the excitement in the room. Then it happened. Derek, the very same man who had sought my forgiveness, sabotaged my presentation. Midway through my pitch, he intentionally misrepresented key details, thinking I wouldn't notice. Panic surged through me as I saw confusion spreading across my colleagues' faces. Instead of reacting with anger, I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in. A part of me wanted to lash out to expose Derek in front of everyone, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions dictate my response any longer. "Let's take this one step at a time," I said, regaining my composure. "Derek, can you clarify what you just proposed? I'd like to hear more on that." As I called on him, his facade crumbled. He stammered nervously, realizing he had only succeeded in exposing his own insecurity. My teammates looked between us, the tension thickening. I subtly redirected the conversation, bringing everyone back to the original goal: making this project a success. That moment proved to be a turning point not just for Derek but for the whole team. It reminded them collectively of the power of honesty and accountability. While Derek was too stubborn to openly apologize then, he later admitted how foolish he had been after the investors left. "I thought you wouldn't care, Jake," he muttered in a moment of resignation. "Maybe I never wanted to believe you could do better than us." I took a deep breath, my protective wall of bitterness starting to break. "But I do care, Derek. I want each of us to succeed. I know we can do it together." As the weeks went by, my leadership role started to solidify, not defined by revenge, but rather by the warmth of new possibilities. Dario still pushed the limits, but he began to recognize that his actions wouldn't earn him anything here. My team started to create something real, something proud, and as they worked harder, the atmosphere grew lighter. Yet I felt a lingering sense of unease. I knew the defining moment of my growth was still ahead. I wanted to see if I would have the guts to truly forgive my past and move forward without a grudge. I relied heavily on Mr. Wallace's wisdom, modeling my growth after his ownership of kindness and resilience. Finally, I decided it was time. The culmination of my journey awaited. I sent out a message requesting only Derek and Dario to meet at the cafe again, the place where the past could hang heavy. When they arrived, I saw both shame and hesitation in their eyes. We've all hit some rough patches during this journey, haven't we? I started, consciousness blending with nostalgia. But I want to turn the page. I don't want us to be defined by who we were, but by what we can become. My words echoed in the small cafe, a reminder of the pain we had shared and the growth we could achieve. It provided a moment to consider the connections forged through our trials. Their expressions softened, and I sensed the walls beginning to collapse. Finally, I looked directly at Derek. You were right about being afraid, but we can confront that fear together. I'm willing to start fresh if you are. Let's not let our past dictate what we create in the future. Derek's eyes flickered with vulnerability, and he nodded slowly, his composure cracking. I don't want to be that person anymore either, he replied quietly. For the first time, I saw genuine acceptance reflected in both their faces. Forgiveness poured forth, and I felt the burden of my past slip away. When I left that cafe, I understood my journey had come full circle. The laughter of my past transformed into soft reflections, and I was no longer the guy they scoffed at. I had embraced the power of resilience and forgiveness. It became evident that my ultimate revenge was not to punish but to uplift not just me but every voice seeking a second chance. In the end, I had faced what I once believed was a tragic story of vengeance. Instead, I lived a journey fueled by growth, understanding, and connection, the kind of tale worth sharing, worth celebrating. And as I walked toward my future, I finally felt free to step into the sunlight, confident in the man I'd become.